Hey fellow Tamers and Digidestined, it's Mike, AKA Synaku from Overground, and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be going over a WarGreymon deck, and no, it's not Yellow War, it's not what you think. It does contain the Yellow WarGreymon, however, it is a red deck. So yes, this is red, Yellow WarGreymon. This is a deck that I've had a lot of fun with over the last couple of weeks, and it's a deck that I still don't think has reached its maximum potential, but it's a deck that I still want to kind of experiment with and hopefully get some better results moving forward in the future. This is a deck that I started building right at the beginning of BT4, and then as soon as I was able to pick up the rest of my pieces to build Yellow War, I kind of abandoned it and left it by the wayside. A good friend of mine, Dwarf Commander, who I'll link to his stream below, he's been taking a similar version of this deck that we had built together to locals, and he's been getting a lot of good results with it as well. The original draft had a lot of hybrid components, and we were playing stuff like Silphymon, more copies of Aquilamon, as well as stuff like Ultimon to kind of get extra advantage through early pressure. I found this version of the deck was much more consistent in terms of it's not going all in all the time. You actually can kind of take your time and take more a tempo approach to the game. This is also a deck that a good friend of mine in the community, Corsari, had started with as a baseline, and we were kind of messaging back and forth on ideas on how to improve it. And I promised him that I would be making a video about this, and I promised him that I would give him a shout out, especially on a spicy tech that you can include in this deck. It's not in this current draft, but I will be mentioning it later on in the video. So thank you, Corsari, for putting me onto that card. So let's talk about this deck right now and kind of what it aims to do. Your contemporary Yellow WarGreymon deck aims to kind of generate advantage through taking your own life, your own security, basically. And what that deck does is that it gets you down to like that 3 or less security threshold, and then the deck just explodes with advantage. Red is inherently aggressive, kind of just by nature, and because it gets a lot of DP buffs, and it also gets a lot of like security attack +1 kind of buffs kind of built into the archetype as a whole. And what this deck aims to do in terms of having WarGreymon Yellow as a top end is we're using our WarGreymon's effect primarily in combination with the security attack +1 Greymon. So that way we can take 4 checks against the opponent while simultaneously kind of whittling down their board. And because red has so much removal in it as well by default, taking away our own security is a little bit riskier in red, but it also has to be done a bit more strategically, because you need to kind of combo that in proper tempo and in proper time with other sources of removal that you're playing as well. And as we kind of get through the rest of the deck, you'll see what I mean when I say that, because this is a very difficult deck to play optimally, but when you kind of get the gears turning and everything kind of starts going into motion, it's very hard to stop. So similarly to the full yellow deck, where your advantage kind of is blown out based on what you have in hand, and primarily through your level 3s, something like, Pulsemon, Bushiagumon, Lucemon. This deck, the kind of advantage is kind of built into your single stack, how you build it, because one single WarGreymon stack, depending on how you actually get the proper cards in chain in sequence, can potentially end a game very, very quickly on its own without having to need all those external kind of extra auxiliary cards. So let's talk about the deck right now, and kind of hopefully as we go through the card by card, what I'm starting to say about this will make a lot more sense. And if it doesn't, just call me out in the comments at the end of the video, and maybe I'll leave a little bit of a blurb to kind of explain where my thought process was as I'm rambling on right now. So let's go through the card by card. So let's start with the X. We're playing 4 copies of Digimon and 1 copy of Coromon. I'm still not sure if I want to swap this ratio. Right now, as it stands, Gigimon's a little bit better because we are swinging with our Digimon that aren't necessarily full stacks, so they will benefit from that extra boost, and it is pretty easy and common for your opponent to reach 5 in trash relatively early in this format. Onto the rookies, we're playing 4 copies of the starter deck Agumon, 4 copies of the promo Agumon, and 3 copies of Agumon Expert. You see a theme here. We want all Agumon all the time. We want to make sure we always have an Agumon in our hand to put into our raising area to start our chain. Ideally, we want the promo Agumon here, because this will make sure that our WarGreymon stack, on top of a Digimon especially, can reach heights of 14,000. Now, unfortunately, 15 is pretty much the magic number of this format, but 14 is good enough for now, for the time being, that most decks, if they do play level 7, only play about maybe 2 copies total. So if you are staring down the barrel of the gun of a Folder Arm, you're generally safer with 14,000, because a lot of the decks this format pretty much cap out at 13. So yeah, that's kind of what I just wanted to make sure that we can always do, because you are generally going to be swinging at your opponent's security relatively often with WarGreymon, and you just want to make sure that he will survive those swings. Then we're rounding out a rookie lineup with the 3 copy of the promo 0.0 Biomon. This is in here because we do have a lot of potential to use our first or second swings with WarGreymon to go after our opponent's stuff, and because we have that DP reduction kind of built into the WarGreymon as well, that'll always make sure that we can beat over whatever they are threatening as well. This is also to work in tandem with our 2 copies of BlitzGreymon, especially since we have that piercing already built in that lets us get over an opponent's Digimon, deal with the security, and then get an additional draw. So I'm not quite sure how I sit on these Biomons right now. They were originally 3 Monodramons because they had synergy with Air of Dragons. I swapped them out last minute just because I felt that red did need the random extra consistency sometimes, and it never hurts to have more draw power in a deck that already kind of struggles with finding its pieces as it is. As I test more, this might go back to Monodramon, it might get replaced with something else. In some early drafts as well, it was actually the Digiburst Agumon, so we just had a full suite of Agumons. It was quite fun. But for now, I'm quite happy with how the Biomon is performing, because we do have a lot of DP buffs in this deck, so you have a lot of potential to run over your opponent's stuff. And you have a lot of DP manipulation outside of WarGreymon himself, which we'll talk to as we get through the rest of the deck. So moving on to our champions, we have 4 copies of the Starter Deck Greymon. This is the Security Attack +1 inheritable. 3 copies of Fugimon. Fugimon is a very interesting card for this deck, and if you were to swap out for the hot tech that I'm going to mention at the end of the video, this would probably be the card that you take out. I do prefer Fugimon right now just because it is a 3-cost champion, so you can get it into play relatively quickly and start setting up your stack faster. And it also kind of is a good card to end your turn on, because especially we're in a very tamer-heavy format. So if you're at 0, you just play Fugimon, you put opponent to 3. Going into your next turn, you already have a champion to work with. You don't have to worry about evolving over something. And worst case scenario, it's a 1-cost evolution as well to kind of turbo into your bigger Digimon. Playing 3 copies of Korgemon. Korgemon is here because we need blockers to survive. Blockers are unfortunately not very good in a WarGreymon yellow-heavy meta, but we do need it for other matchups that our opponent could be potentially rushing us with. Korgemon also synergizes with Air of Dragons when we get to that point. And finally, we're playing 2 copies of Agunimon. This is just here because it gives us extra potential to kind of close the game out a little bit faster, since we are playing red tamers, and why not take advantage of such a powerful mechanic. Then moving on to our ultimates, and this is where I talk about the more DP manipulation side of things that helps us kind of get extra removal in this deck. So we want to have as most consistent options to get to WarGreymon as much as possible. And since he's yellow, both of these ultimates right now, they're the only ultimates in the game right now as it stands that are dual colored. So while they're in the battlefield, they're also treated as yellow. So that means if we do evolve from one of our champions into one of these ultimates, we can evolve one of these into the Yellow WarGreymon. Yeah, and that's 4 copies of Silphymon and 4 copies of the new BlitzGreymon from BT4. Now, if you're unfamiliar with these cards, I'm not surprised, especially Silphymon, because you don't see it in too many decks, so I will kind of do a quick rundown of what these cards do. Silphymon, when digivolving, you can change the original DP of one of your opponent's level 4 or lower Digimon to 1000. So level 4 or lower means that any champion or below, and a lot of champions kind of clock in at 6000. So if you can reduce any champion in play to 1000, you can then take advantage of any further DP manipulation through something like BlitzGreymon's inheritable, WarGreymon's effect proper, or even Air of Dragons when we get to that, to actually just eliminate it completely without having to use any additional removal or waste any additional resources. This will also help you in cases where you need to, if you have extra rookies on board, you can actually reduce one of your opponent's rookies to a smaller number, or their champions, have one of your smaller guys run it over without having to waste a bigger attack on taking out one of those. You can actually save your bigger DP numbers for the security swings, because you're hoping that they're more likely to survive. In BlitzGreymon, again, during our turn, screen is yellow, but we have the option to Digiburst 2, and we get to play a 4-cost or less yellow or red tamer for free. And the only tamer we play in this deck is Marcus, but it helps us accelerate our Marcus into play without necessarily having to play Marcus and waste our turn or end our turn. Then moving on to our Megas, we're playing 4 copies of the WarGreymon himself, and complementing that with 2 copies of BlitzGreymon. And the reason we're playing BlitzGreymon is because it also has Greymon in its name, so it'll combo really well with our Agumon promo, as well as Marcus. Having extra Digimon that can attack and trigger Marcus is very important. BlitzGreymon can do that himself, as well as this Greymon proper. Very unlikely that you will be swinging with this Greymon on its own, however, having more copies with the name Greymon in the deck that all synergize kind of really well together is very important. BlitzGreymon can also help trigger our Air of Dragons effect. And BlitzGreymon, in combination with something like Agumon and then a Gigimon or Koromon, can actually get up to 15,000 himself. So he basically has jamming for all intents and purposes, because the biggest Digimon in the format, in security, will not destroy him. So he's actually very safe to kind of just constantly plow through your opponent's security, as well as getting over any of your opponent's big Digimon. If they have something like a Chaosmon already suspended, he can actually take it out and then do piercing damage even further. And then we're playing 2 level 7s. Now, in a red deck, normally your level 7 choice would be Omnimon. However, because we're playing more yellow top end than we are red, our level 7 of choice in this case will be Valder Arm, so we can evolve it over top of WarGreymon to get extra removal. The one thing I forgot to mention with BlitzGreymon as well, is that he has an inheritable, where if you have a tamer in play, which you're generally getting a tamer in play with his own effect, on attack declaration you get to minus 2,000 from one of your opponent's Digimon. So in combination with WarGreymon, you can essentially minus something by 8,000 total. But if you have a stack with the BlitzGreymon inheritable, and you also digivolve into Silphymon in the same turn, you can swing with this Digimon that has the inheritable and just straight up delete whatever you reduce down with Silphymon, which is actually very powerful as well. And then we're going to get into our options. So we're playing 3 copies of Gaia Force. It's Gaia Force. It's one of the best options in the game. You need to play some in some capacity just to make sure that you have that extra removal in your hand, as well as extra removal in your security. And we're playing playing 2 copies of Air Dragons. Now, this is a card I've talked about at length throughout the entirety of the deck profile, and it's a card that I'm trying to squeeze into as many red decks as possible. And you did see this card in our red Shine Greymon deck that we built for the Rainbow series. And what this deck does as well is that what this card does as well, rather, it costs 3, but it lets you draw 2 immediately. So as we talked about, red has kind of a consistency issue. It doesn't have a lot of search power. It doesn't have a lot of extra ways to kind of draw into your power cards. So Air Dragons in combination with the Biomon was kind of my take and my theory on helping me get more consistency and start seeing more cards more regularly. But it has a bonus effect, and I'm trying to see if I can build this deck to get that bonus effect off as consistently as possible. And what Air Dragons reads is that if we have a Digimon with Greymon in its name, or Dramon, excluding any of the mistranslated cards, so Adora Greymon, Burning Greymon, or Dex Greymon, which the majority of them we don't actually have in the game yet, but we do Burning Greymon, but it doesn't technically count as Greymon. Its name is Vitramon in Japan. I'm not going to get into a big discussion about that. However, we can destroy something with 4,000 or less. Now, generally speaking, 4,000 or less are reserved for either rookies or some of the lower-end DP champions. But with something like BlitzGreymon, Silphymon, and even WarGreymon himself, we can actually reduce our opponent's Digimon's DP to reach that 4,000 or less threshold, and then we can use Air Dragons to refill our hand and then destroy what we were able to reduce. So while we're still kind of aiming for their security with WarGreymon, sometimes you do have to run into things with WarGreymon and then use your security resource to reduce them to run it over. In this instance, we're actually still going after their security and using our security resources to reduce their Digimon in a capacity that we can just take them out through other means. And that way, if our WarGreymon does die in security, we don't lose that capacity to still take out their Digimon. So we're kind of attacking them on 2 fronts at the same time. And Air Dragons works really well with Silphymon, because now anything that was over 4,000, we bring it down to 1,000, and now it's a valid target to be destroyed with Air Dragons. And in terms of Greymon and Dramon in its name, we have Greymon, we have Greymon, we have BlitzGreymon, we have WarGreymon, and we also have Dramon, because it's a Dramon Digimon. And again, this is where the excuse to play Mono Dramon would actually come in handy here, because it would allow us to have another Digimon in play that would trigger the destruction effect of Air of Dragons. And then finally, Marcus. So Marcus, it's a memory tamer, sets you to 3 every turn, and on attack declaration, if you attack with a Greymon Digimon, you can actually suspend Marcus to gain 1 memory. This helps you kind of extend your plays a little bit longer, as well as help you reach points where you can actually choke out your opponent more consistently. So yeah, that is the yellow-red WarGreymon deck that we've kind of been working on over the last couple weeks. I'm really happy with how this deck is performing, and I'm really excited to see how much further we can take it, especially once we start getting the new BT5 kind of Greymon/Omnimon support cards. I'm really curious to see how much more consistent we can make this deck overall, but I really like the theory behind this deck, because it's a little bit cheaper than your standard yellow WarGreymon deck if you're having a hard time getting your hands on something like Pulsemon, for example. So you can still play the WarGreymon yellow in a capacity that's a little bit kind of easier on your wallet, that's still just as powerful. It still struggles a little bit with consistency, but that's what we're trying to fine-tune right now. And finally, to talk about the last spicy card that I promised you in the beginning of the video, this is from 1.5 BT3. This is the Aquilamon. And what Aquilamon reads is that when attacking, you can delete one of your opponent's Digimon with 2,000 or less. So the one cool thing about BlitzGreymon with this inheritable is that it's not once per turn. So if you can stick a WarGreymon on top of the Rise, by attacking twice with the WarGreymon, you're actually reducing something by 4,000 total, or you're reducing multiple Digimon by 2,000. And what that means is that with this Aquilamon, who's also not once per turn, you could potentially go after your opponent's security twice, reduce your opponent's Digimon to a point where Aquilamon can just destroy it on its own, and you don't actually have to waste an attack into them. Unfortunately, it's been really rough in testing, because not only does it cost 2 to evolve in a deck that we're already kind of dealing with memory manipulation issues if we don't have access to Marcus, it's also 6 to hard play, which can sometimes set you back tremendously. So I've replaced it with Fugamon for now, just for speed. However, if I do find that I am lacking in the removal aspect, or feel like this deck could benefit from just more aggression and more straight removal, I might go back to Aquilamon. So definitely keep this card in your back pocket as an alternative for something in this deck. And again, big thanks to Corsari for pointing this card out to me, because I wouldn't have thought about that combo otherwise. So yeah, if you guys have any comments, thoughts, or suggestions about the video, please leave a comment in the section below. If you think that, this deck's trash, or if you think that I'm just completely off in left field, let me know as well. I love reading all of your comments. I love reading what you guys think about the decks that we build, and I love building them up together with the community. If you like this video as well, please give it a thumbs up so we know that this content is going directly to you guys and that you are enjoying what you see. And if you like Overground as a whole, and you haven't already, please consider subscribing and help us reach our next subscriber milestone, which is 500 by the end of July. I have been Mike, aka Synaku, once again. Thanks so much for watching the video, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.